The history of fencing is a long and storied one, and while sword fighting has been around for thousands of years, the sport of fencing has ancient origins and is believed to have developed from the similar techniques of swordplay, wrestling, and boxing. The first recorded evidence of fencing as a competitive sport was around 588 AD in the Byzantine Empire. But it wasn't until the late 18th century that modern fencing came about with its two styles, classical fencing and modern Olympic sport fencing, each style representing something different but all coming together under one umbrella term. Ancient origins of fencing. Fencing can be traced back to ancient civilizations, where it was used for both self-defense and combat. The first evidence of swordsmanship appears in Egypt around 3,000 years ago. The Egyptians used swords for both dueling and war and developed a number of different techniques for fighting with them. In ancient Greece, swordsmanship also became popular and was used in both civilian and military contexts. The history of fencing really started with the Greeks when they developed the first fencing schools and created a number of different styles of swordsmanship which are still used today. In the 16th century, fencing masters in Italy developed the three styles of fencing that are still practiced today. These masters were very influential in the development of fencing and were responsible for codifying many of the techniques and rules that are still used in fencing today. The three main masters are Filippo Vadi, Achille Marozzo, and Rodolfo Capoferro. Filippo Vadi was alive from 1482-1540. One of his published works, De Arte Gladiatoria Dimicandi, contains detailed illustrations on how to fence with the sword and buckler, sword and dagger, one-handed longsword, quarterstaff, two-handed swords, pole axes, and spears. Achille Marozzo lived from 1463-1536, and his book Opera Nova is one of the most important sources of information on Renaissance swordsmanship. It contains detailed descriptions of the armored and unarmored combat of the period, as well as illustrations of various techniques. Rodolfo Capoferro lived from 1550-1619. His book, Gran Simulacro dell'arte e dell'offesa di spada e sciabola, is one of the most important sources of information on Baroque swordsmanship. It contains detailed descriptions of the techniques and principles used at the time. French classical fencing is said to have originated in the 17th century when King Louis XIV decreed that French nobility was required to train in the rapier. The belle épée was used exclusively under this decree, which continued until the late 1800s when other weapons were also allowed. France's École des Maîtres d'Armes, School of Swordmasters, was founded in 1670, making it one of the earliest schools for teaching military skills and civilian self-defense in Europe. However, by the early 18th century, members of French society captured sword-fighting arts around Europe and began teaching them to others in Parisian salons. This led to the establishment of the Academy of Arms in 1725, which became recognized as the national school for French fencing. This school's headmaster was Joachim Napoleon Murat, who also taught King Louis XVI and his family. His methods were renowned across Europe, spreading to England by 1830 when they became adopted at the Academy of Chivalry there. One of the most important fencing schools was founded by Domenico Angelo in 1763, who is the first person to have laid down rules for modern fencing. In this same year, he had first published his book, L'École des Armes. This consisted of a series of lessons that were based on his time as a pupil in Naples with some masters that had first taught him. It is said that during this time he observed classically styled fencing and also fenced himself. He also observed the French school of fencing, which was done with small swords called foils. What made his school different from any that had preceded it was the fact that he emphasized on weapon handling and footwork, which would be essential for gaining control of the fight. He also taught students how to use their blades in order to disarm their opponents, highlighting the importance of this skill. His work had influenced the French school of fencing. Some notable names who were influenced by his work include Jean-Louis Michel and La Boissière. Angelo's book gained some success in France through these individuals, who enjoyed it so much that they began to spread its popularity among people who would be interested in it. Angelo's book was the first to include the concept of a foil, which is a light sword with a small circular handguard. This would be used for practice and competition with rules that were developed by Angelo. First fencing competition in Olympics. The history of fencing in the Olympics started in 1896 in Athens, Greece. They were men's foil, master's foil, only held for one more event afterwards, and sabre events, and only 4 nations participated: Austria, France, Denmark, and Greece. In these games, there were 4 events planned, but the épée contest was canceled for unknown reasons. The foil competition was won by a Frenchman, Eugène-Henri Gravelotte, who defeated his compatriot Henry Callet in the finale. The other two competitions, the sabre and masters foil, were both won by Greek fencers. Leonidas Pyrgos, who won the masters foil event, became Greece's first Olympic champion in modern history. In 1912, women were finally allowed to compete in the Olympic Games, with the first women's fencing event starting in 1924. This was a foil event, as épée and sabre were considered inappropriate for women. Glad we've moved past that. The fencing competition in the Olympic Games has grown over time, and now features 3 different weapons: foil, épée, and sabre. There are also multiple events for each weapon, with men's and women's competitions held separately. Please like, subscribe, and comment for the next video you want to see.